Triple disqualification in Shanghai as Charles Leclerc, Pierre Gasly and Lewis Hamilton are all disqualified from the Chinese Grand Prix as Red Bull consider the future of Liam Lawson. Elsewhere, Oscar Piastri converted pole position into victory, leading home a McLaren 1-2. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parkinson. Ian, I'll be honest with you, mate, it was a pretty boring race. I was starting to think, what on earth are we going to talk about in this F1 update? Well, from the most boring race in recent memory to perhaps the most dramatic post-race drama, we have got not one, not two, but three disqualifications, and I think I need to lie down. Take it away.
Wasn't that boring, Nick? Come on, give it.
It wasn't the best, let's be honest. It was
some
strategic.
Credit. It wasn't
I was
the best.
bored.
I agree, yeah, because we were expecting two-stop race for everybody, and all the leaders did a one-stop in the end. But enough of that. We'll get onto the actual race breakdown in a few moments, because obviously, quite clearly, what we do have to discuss is this remarkable triple disqualification. We've got both Charles Leclerc and Pierre Gasly disqualified for their car being underweight. And we've got Lewis Hamilton, not for the first time in his career, it has to be said, bearing in mind it happened in Mercedes, being disqualified for plank wear being below the legal limit. So quite astonishing. And it has led to an almighty reshuffle of the order, with the exception of course, the top four, because we had Oscar from Lando, from George, from Max, and then, of course, then we get our changes. So I'll leave you to take it away. Just give the folks listening and watching a brief rundown of the top 10 after that, Nick.
Well, I would normally leave this until the end of the episode, but it's such a big change. I've got to do it now. So, of course, the top four remains unchanged. It was Oscar Piastri victorious, ahead of Lando Norris, George Russell in third, and Max Verstappen in fourth. Then comes the almighty changes, because Esteban Ocon for Haas finished in fifth. Kimi Antonelli, who also had damage, finished in sixth. Alex Albon in seventh. Oliver Behrman in eighth, Lance Stroll in ninth, and Carlos Sainz picked up his first point for Williams in P10. So, Ian, I mean, a big shuffle. That's lots of points for midfield teams. And I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it, that, as you mentioned, the expectation was from Pirelli it was going to be a two-stop race. They even said themselves that a three-stop wasn't going to be impossible. Yet, bizarrely, almost every single driver, barring a few, went for a one-stop, and in the end, it was the drivers who, like Lewis, who actually provisionally finished sixth before being disqualified, went for a two-stop. But it was very much the one-stop was, after all, the way to go.
It was that boring part of the race, wasn't it? Because the fact is, the hard tyres had not been used in any way, shape or form across the course of the weekend. Of course, there being only one practice session, so quite naturally the teams focused on a medium tyre and a little bit of soft running going into sprint qualifying, and of course with the qualifying on Saturday morning as well. Sorry, the sprint on Saturday morning ahead of the qualifying in the afternoon. So no hard tyre running at all, but as it proved, the hard tyre was very durable. And that's why I think a lot of teams were caught out. And you have to wonder whether that's led to the disqualifications of Charles Leclerc and Pierre Gasly for, as I say, being below the fuel limit. Because we saw it in Belgium last year with George Russell, of course, when he was disqualified for pretty much exactly the same thing. He did a one-stop where many people were expecting more. So naturally, then we had this fuel discrepancy in the car. The unusual thing about Charles Leclerc, of course, is he had this front wing damage as well, which occurred with a minor collision with his teammate Lewis going around the turn 1-2 loop on the very first lap. And looked like then that potentially he might be called in to get the front wing changed. He actually had a pit stop. Ferrari opted not to do a front wing change. They thought that the way the car was performing, it could carry on, no problem. So come the weighing scales, and there with the FIA, there's both an inside and an outside weighing scales, just to let you know, folks, in case you've been unaware of that. And the car is weighed, or the cars are weighed on both sets of scales to ensure that there is consistency across both ways. And it turns out that, bearing in mind that the car of Charles was weighed initially with the front wing damage. That, of course, led to a little bit of weight there being lost. It proved to be exactly on the 800 kilogram minimum weight limit. They then weighed the car with a brand new front wing because that is what they are allowed to do. And obviously, a measurement was taken. But once then the fuel was taken out of the car, the required 2-litre sample, which then proved to be underweight. So, and that was on both sets of scales as well, the inside and the outside. Ferrari representatives were there, of course. They could see that the sets of scales were technically correct. There were no discrepancies in the scales, no excuses from Ferrari. They've held their hands up and said, it's an error on our part. It's exactly the same with Lewis Hamilton, just to let you know as well. So there's going to be no appeals of these disqualifications. Alpine, the same. They've said it was an error. But the unusual one for Lewis, of course, here, Nick, is that the plank wear, you're supposed to have a 9mm left on the plank at the end of a Grand Prix. On Lewis, on the left-hand side of the plank, it was 8.6, centerline 8.6, right-hand side 8.5 millimeters. So that was definitely below the legal limit. The unusualness, is, in terms of what I'm saying here, is, of course, is that this was a brand new circuit in terms of brand new surface. Sorry,
Yeah.
it'd only been resurfaced in August last year. So it was almost billiard table smooth. And yet we have this plank wear on Lewis's car. Now, when Lewis was last disqualified for plank wear, when he was at Mercedes at the United States Grand Prix, there was kind of a little bit of understanding because that circuit is so bumpy that naturally it wore away at the plank. And obviously Mercedes and Lewis got caught on that particular occasion. I think Charles Leclerc got done that same day as
He
well, if I
did.
remember
He
right.
did. I was going to
So,
say that. Yeah.
yeah. So both Charles and Lewis disqualified in those two Grand Prix, obviously on this occasion for different things, but on that occasion in the United States for the plank wear. So really, really unusual situation that Lewis should be disqualified for this. As I say, bearing in mind that is a relatively new, only in August last year, as I say, surface at the Shanghai International Circuit. First time in Ferrari history, by the way, that they have ever had two cars disqualified from a Grand Prix. So quite an awful day for Ferrari, just when they'd been ushering in this new era with Lewis Hamilton as one of their drivers. They
Yeah.
had this double DSQ, and that's going to take, obviously, a big hit for them in the Constructors' Championship. Who knows what impact that might have on the standings come the end of the season. But at the moment, it's definitely McLaren, the team to beat after their 1-2 result today.
And it was, you mentioned there, McLaren 1-2, Oscar Piastri brilliantly converting pole position into victory. I mean, never really looked challenged. Lando Norris, though, in second, he had to work for it a little bit because George Russell, to give him credit, gave it his best shot.
He did. In fairness to George, got passed around the outside of that turn 1-2 loop by Lando on that first lap. So immediately we had a 1-2 running order for McLaren with Oscar ahead of Lando. But then Mercedes managed to perform the undercut with George ahead on lap 18, I think it was, if memory serves me well. But then not long after, Lando managed to produce a really good overtaking maneuver to go, I think it's turn 6, if I remember right again.
Yeah, doing
Yeah,
well.
it wasn't turn 14. I remember it was one of the hairpins, and I think it was the turn 6 hairpin where Lando managed to get past George and reclaim second place. And that was, you felt, relatively it until we got towards the end of the race, and there was this late brake drama for Lando Norris. He described himself as being scared, and rightly so, because when your brakes are starting to fail on a car that's hurtling at 250 odd, about 300 kilometers an hour, if you think about it, down that long back straight into the hairpin, the last thing you want to do is for the brakes to go at that particular point and you're hurtling across that gravel. Then, so Lando said it was one of his worst nightmares. He said it's the thing that he has a nightmare about with the brakes going. and he was told that the brake was going long, that he was told by his race engineer, Will Joseph, that not to apply too much pressure on the brakes, under braking. And then, of course, he was told that, I think it was the penultimate lap, that the brakes were critical. So he really had to manage the braking over that last lap and a half. And we saw George come hurtling along at a rapid rate of knots on that final lap, but finished 1.5 seconds shy. So Lando just did enough. And of course, the McLaren 1-2, with Oscar winning his third Grand Prix for McLaren. That's McLaren's 50th 1-2 in their history. Something for them to celebrate. While for a team like Ferrari, it's a horrific day.
And it is, of course, now meaning that McLaren have got a small, excuse me, a small buffer in the Constructors' Championship. And of course, Lando is leading the Drivers' Championship. I believe it's 8 points, but
8
fine
points over
margins.
Max.
And yeah, and it can all change very, very quickly, as we saw after the race with the triple DSQs. But let's talk about Max and Red Bull. You just mentioned there, Max, right at the end. An interesting day for Max. It was in sixth for the majority of the race. Fell quite far off the Ferraris, who were in fourth and fifth, but all of a sudden Max came back through at a rate of knots in the latter stages, ended up finishing in an impressive fourth, given that quite clearly Red Bull have got issues. But more alarmingly, Liam Lawson finished, as a result now of the 3 disqualifications, he finished 12th, but once again, very, very far off the pace. And it does seem that, they are considering perhaps his future, because Red Bull have something to solve here, that there is some big problems, it does seem, with the RB21, not just for Liam, but actually, based on Max's comments, for him as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's taken us, 11 minutes for me to talk about Max Verstappen in this video, and it was pretty much the same. I
Yeah.
noticed on the Sky Sports F1 commentary where David Croft turned around at one point and said, we haven't discussed Max Verstappen for quite a while. And that pretty much summed up Max's race. After dropping from 4th to 6th through that turn 1-2 loop. Not a great start for him, but the Ferraris both managed to make their way by Max. It then became pretty much an anonymous race. It was kind of like producing reasonable lap times, managing to keep the leaders within sight to a certain extent, but never having enough within that car to make any inroads. And as you're saying, it was only towards the end of the Grand Prix, where the tyres eventually came to him, that we saw Max come to the fore a little bit. And finally, after him running in, he was running in 6th. Lewis then pitted for a second time. He
Yep.
was the only driver of the leaders to make a second pit stop. Max then got promoted to 5th, although he was closing in on Lewis at that particular time, and I think that's why Ferrari made that stop. And then late on, he managed to get past Charles Leclerc for that 4th spot. But as you say, bigger problems at Red Bull is the fact that they've got these issues with this RB21 to such an extent, it's having this massive knock-on effect for its young driver, Liam Lawson. Now, we've discussed Liam in quite some depth following Saturday's F1 on Saturday's F1 update, following the sprint race, and of course following the qualification for the Grand Prix. And Christian Horner, in his post-race media session, was asked on 2 occasions whether Red Bull would be considering a driver swap, because Helmut Marko had intimated it might be the case for the Japanese Grand Prix, which is the next race coming up in a fortnight's time. And on both occasions, Christian has basically, he's not really bitten. He's refused to rule it out. Now, the surprising thing within Christian's comments is that in some of the things that he's turned around and said, he's actually turned around and said he feels sorry for Liam and everything that he's going through at the minute, that he's coming under all this media pressure. Well, he was offered the opportunity to basically say, look, Liam's our driver for Japan, because you would expect that in putting this virtual arm around Liam, as he was doing in that particular press conference, you kind of expect him to say, don't worry, he's going to be our driver in Japan. He's got our full support. That's not been the case. He's not offering that kind of support for Liam. Basically, he's turning around and pretty much echoing what Helmut Marko had said on Saturday, that this is a pressure business. It's a results-based business. They're going to go away, look at all the tons of data that they've got. They've got all these hundreds of sensors on this car, and they're going to give a judgment on Liam's performance. The one thing they did do is that obviously they started Liam in the pit lane because he had qualified last. Now, Christian turned around and mentioned that they made radical changes to that Red Bull for this race to see what effect it might have. So it's given him all this data, but despite all this data, he refused to basically confirm that Liam Lawson will be in the car for the Japanese Grand Prix. So watch this space on that one, folks, because we know Red Bull are prone to changes, and it could very well be that Yuki Tsunoda will be in the car for his home race.
My favourite saying this season, only time will tell. And I think that's going to continue as the year goes on. Just finally, though, we've got to talk about what, in my eyes, is the biggest surprise, with the exception of the disqualifications of the Chinese Grand Prix. And that is Haas, who were originally going to be finishing in 7th and 10th, 7th for Ocon, 10th for Behrman. Ended up being, obviously, as I mentioned at the start, 5th for Esteban Ocon, 8th for Oliver Behrman. I mean, the team has quite literally gone from being absolutely nowhere in testing, nowhere in Australia, the team themselves quite clearly panicking and wondering what on earth is going wrong, to all of a sudden finishing at best in the midfield with Ocon and genuinely having pretty reasonable pace. I mean, does this sum up how close to midfield is going to be this season? Because it's quite remarkable how quick this turnaround's happened.
I mean, the phrase is, Nick, what is it, about a week, things happening so fast over a course of a week. And we've seen that quite remarkably with Haas, because, as you say, Haas in Australia, that's it. It's remarkable what a difference a week makes. There you go, folks. I finally got my words.
Straight over my head.
Yeah, exactly. We saw what happened in Australia with Haas. As you said, they were nowhere, to such an extent that Ayo Komatsu, in his media briefing on Thursday in China, in reflecting on what had happened at Melbourne's Albert Park, turned around and said that at one stage he thought the car was broken. It was performing so badly over the course of that Grand Prix, which, of course, we all know was quite a wet, dry affair for the most part. So they came into this weekend not expecting too much. They made changes. Of course they did. They had to make changes because basically it couldn't be any worse. And lo and behold, it actually produced a reasonable level of performance, to such an extent that even without the disqualifications, both Esteban and Ollie would have been in the points in 7th and 10th. As you say, they've now risen to really respectable positions of 5th and 7th. So quite outstanding what's happened there. But yeah, I mean, you can't make it up, basically, what's come out of this weekend now. It's been tremendous amount of stories. And this is only race 2 of a 24 Grand Prix season. Who knows what's going to come out of the rest of this season, the way we're going on. And as I say, watch this space, because we might just get that driver change with Yuki in the Red Bull in Japan and Liam dropping back to the junior team alongside Isaac Hadjar, Racing Bulls, of course.
Well, I think we're going to have probably too much now to discuss on Monday in the Racing News 365 podcast, which you will need to make sure you watch, viewers, because I think it's going to be a very, very good one. And also a very, very quick message that today, the Chinese Grand Prix race day, is the final day for you to enter our giveaway, celebrating 10 years of Racing News 365. If you want to be in with a chance of winning a scale model Formula One car of your favourite team or driver, all you've got to do to be in with a chance of winning is be subscribed to the racingnews365.com channel and comment below of any video, but just do this one, given it's the last video that counts. I want to win. It is as simple as that. As soon as the clock hits midnight, that is it. Giveaway over, and we will select our winners, and I wish you the very best of luck. Ian, awesome as always. Me and Ian will be back on Monday for the Racing News 365 podcast. Be sure to watch it. Please do like this video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you on Monday. See you later.
Take care until then, folks.